Dmitry with Summary Channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 14th of May of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the Russians during the previous 48 hours have launched the biggest massive attack since the beginning of the special military operation. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning stated, once again, let's discuss this number, that by the morning of the 14th of May of 2026, the Russians used 1,623 drones and missiles altogether. The Russians attacked almost every single square kilometer of the territory of Ukraine. We have this map where we can see the common picture of the situation in Ukraine between the morning of the 13th of May till the evening of the 14th of May of 2026. As you can see, lots of explosions through the western parts of Ukraine, lots of explosions in the area of the city of Kiev, and of course lots of explosions along the line of combat contact. We need to understand that this Russian massive attack had several purposes and several tasks. First of all, of course, to show the Ukrainians and to show the Ukrainians the Russian possibilities, capabilities. This is the first thing. The second thing is to force the Ukrainian side to accept the Russia's demands and to begin the real negotiation process with the Russian Federation. And of course, to withdraw troops from the rest of Donbass, which can start the negotiation process itself. But we know that as of the end of the 14th of May of 2026, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, rejected the Russia's proposals regarding ceasefire, regarding the withdrawal of troops, but he decided to order his special forces to prepare a retaliatory strike, and most likely in coming days, the Ukrainians will strike back. I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are able to carry out massive attacks during the upcoming night between the 14th and the 15th of May of 2026, because it seems that the Russians during the previous 24 hours deal significant damage to the Ukrainians and to their warehouses, ammo depots, on their drones facilities. And for example, today we received the report that the Russians, as a result of attack in the northwestern parts of the city of Kiev, managed to damage and to destroy an office that was headquarters of a factory that produces drones that Ukrainians use to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. So, summarizing everything, we think that Ukrainians indeed suffered huge losses during the previous 24 hours, and from these perspectives, most likely the Ukrainians are not able to strike back during the upcoming night. They need to concentrate forces, they need to accumulate drones, and only then they will attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. But the most important thing is that the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, stated that he asked his special forces, special services, to prepare not a massive counterattack, massive counter-strike on the territory of the Russian Federation. He was asking about special operation, which means that in coming days we might see some special operations carried by the Ukrainians. Maybe some cars will explode, maybe something else, but we'll see something on the territory of Russia. Maybe not a single thing, but maybe several explosions, several attacks would be carried out by the Ukrainians. And the third and the most important thing why the Russians were attacking the territory of Ukraine during the previous 24 hours is that the Russians understand that most likely they will be forced to finish the conflict on the territory of Ukraine and to get their demands, and to force the Ukrainians to accept the Russia's demands only using military means. Most likely the Russians realized this, so that is why basically this massive attack was something like rocket drone preparation before the beginning of major offensives along the entire line of combat contact. And for example, as of the 14th of May of 2026, we received lots of very interesting updates on this matter. So let's discuss the situation on the ground, and let's try to understand where exactly the Russians are beginning their major offensives. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were published from the settlement by the name of Hotin. In the eastern parts of the settlement, we can see a Russian drone that was attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine through the eastern parts of the settlement. So nothing special, but as of the northwestern parts of the settlement, here we can see how the Russians were bombing temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine with FABs. As a result of attack, the northern temporary deployment point most likely was destroyed. So it seems that in coming days, the Russians will begin offensive operation in the direction of the city of Khotin from the north through the settlement of Kondratovka, and from the northeast through the settlement of Pisarevka from the area of the village of Mala Karchakovka. So most likely in coming days, the Russians would try to establish complete control or to answer the settlement of Khotin with the purpose to take under complete control all these territories and to improve positions right in front of the city of Sumy in the Sumy agglomeration. Few more explosions and strikes were recorded along the Kharkiv direction. One of the explosions was recorded on the territory of the city by the name of Velika Pisarevka. In this video, we can see the settlement of Velika Pisarevka. The Russians discovered positions of the FPV drone operators of the armed forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians attacked them. The second attack took place in the area of the settlement of Khotin. So it seems that the Russians may try to improve their positions in this area in coming days. As for the Kharkiv and the Kupiansk directions, during the previous 12 hours we haven't received anything, which means that most likely these directions are not going to be primary directions for the Russians for coming weeks. Now let's discuss the situation in the Druzhkovka, Slaviansk, Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk direction. We have lots of very interesting updates, and these updates tells us that most likely the Russians are going to intensify their offensive operation in this area in coming days. First of all, we have changes on the ground, and the changes are coming from the area around the settlement of Alexandrovka. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how the Russians were securing trenches and strongholds, former strongholds of the armed forces of Ukraine, and as a result of attack, the Russians improved their positions right in front of the settlement of Alexandrovka. Currently, the distance to the village is less around 1 kilometer, but telling the truth, I believe that currently the clashes are already taking place on the territory of the settlement. Today, for example, several pro-Russian sources stated that as of the end of the 14th of May of 2026, the Russians controlled up to 40% of the settlement of Alexandrovka, and the Russians continue advancing further and continue improving their positions significantly. So maybe this is something like the current situation in this area. The Russians are pushing forward and the Ukrainians are retreating towards the northwestern and the western parts of the settlement. At the same time, a bit further to the east, we have several videos published by pro-Russian sources where we can see how the Russians were raising their flags through the settlements of Kaleniki and Riznikovka. This is another proof, another evidence that the Russians indeed, as a result of clashes, established complete control over these two villages, and the Russians are ready to move further. The most important update from this area this morning was published by the pro-Ukrainians, by a pro-Ukrainian source, and we have a very interesting map updates in the area of the settlement of Tikhonovka, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 13th of May of 2026, and this is the end of the 14th of May of 2026. According to this report, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukraine's defense along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal and to answer the village of Tikhonovka from the east. At the same time, the Russians intensified their artillery strikes through the villages around the area. So once again, these are the changes, and it seems that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and now the Russians are sending troops, infantry, sabotage and reconnaissance groups along this tree line with the purpose to answer the settlement of Tikhonovka from the east and to dig in deeper. So maybe this is the beginning of something bigger than just attack on another village, because this attack is taking place on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and this is if Russians are able to take on the complete control of these territories, this can lead to complete collapse of the inside defense line of the armed forces of Ukraine to the east of the city of Konstantinovka. Currently, the Russians, as we can see, are trying to take on the complete control of these territories along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and if it happens, the distance between the Russian positions and the city of Kramatorsk itself would be less than 9 kilometers, which is already nothing when talking about battle for the final Donbas Arc operation target. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction, where the situation continues deteriorating for the armed forces of Ukraine. During the previous days, the Russians bombed and destroyed several temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine through the settlement of Drushkovka, but the most important update is coming from the area between the cities of Chasiv Yar and Konstantinovka. Today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that as a result of clashes, the armed forces of the Russian Federation of the group of forces south managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Nikolaevka. And these are the changes on the ground according to the Minister of Defense of Russia. And these are the changes on the ground between the previous several days. So this is the end of the 12th of May. And if you remember, just yesterday we discussed that the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the southeastern parts of the settlement of Molocharka, and it seems that the village was taken by Russians, but the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will report about this in coming days. So most likely this is the current situation on the ground, including this settlement. All these territories are under complete Russian control, and it seems that when the Russians established control over these territories, the Ukrainians in the pockets between the villages of cities of Konstantinovka and Chasiv Yar felt themselves completely uncomfortable. So we are talking about these territories, and Ukrainians most likely realize that if they stay in the villages like Nikolaevka, Chervona, Podolska, then there are very high chances that the Russians would caught them in cauldron. So that is why the Ukrainians withdrew their positions from the territory of Nikolaevka, and the Russians took these positions immediately right after the Ukrainians left this area. So these are the changes on the ground, and this is the situation in this area. Most likely in coming days, the Russians will finish the battle for two more villages in this area. We are talking about the settlements of Podolska and Chervona, and control over these villages will allow the Russians to establish and to maintain the lines through the Chasiv Yar Konstantinovka line. We're talking about these territories, and of course, if it happens, the Russians will improve their logistics significantly. The Russians will be able to continue offensive operation further using this foothold right in the direction of the settlement of Drushkovka, and this could be something completely unexpected for the armed forces of Ukraine, because it seems that the Russians are trying to outsmart the Ukrainians, and it seems that the Russians are trying to move through the final battle not as the Ukrainians got used to during the previous battles, like for the cities of Bakhmut, Toretsk, and many other towns. The Russians are not planning to finish the battle for the city of Konstantinovka. Let's say right now, immediately, the Russians, it seems, are trying to outflank and outmaneuver the Ukrainians to the north of the city, and even probably to answer the settlement of Drushkovka from the east, even before the end of the battle for the city of Konstantinovka. Because if Russians are able to do something like this, obviously the situation for the Ukrainians would become immediately critical. But most likely the Ukrainians will not allow this to happen. They will basically retreat before it happens. Otherwise, they would be caught by the Russians in cauldron. Meanwhile, the Russians continue bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the northwestern parts of the city of Konstantinovka. Lots of FAPs, lots of explosions were recorded, but as we can see, the Ukrainians are still holding their lines. But we see that small collapse happened to the east of the Drushkovka-Konstantinovka agglomeration. Once again, we're talking about Russian control over the settlement of Nikolaevka. As for the Dobropolye direction, the most important update from this area is coming from the territory of the settlement of Novopidgorodnya. During the previous day, additional changes on the ground were recorded. This information was published by very reliable pro-Russian sources, and according to these updates, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions significantly through the western parts of the settlement, and now the Ukrainians control or have strong control over just northwestern parts, but it seems that under such a pressure, the Ukrainians in coming days would be forced to fall back in the direction of the settlements of Retaliation or Kolona Mizhova.
Til dig, der var ung i 80'erne. Til dig, der husker energikriserne og bilfri søndage.
And now let's discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything from this area. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians attack each other, but currently the Ukrainians have problems because the Russians, during the previous 2 days, during the biggest massive attack that started on the 13th of May of 2026, the Russians dealt significant damage to positions and temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine through the city of Zaporozhye and its industrial zones, which means that most likely the Ukrainians currently suffer problems with logistics and so on. So that is why we don't have anything from this area. Meanwhile, the Russians continue their regrouping through the western Zaporozhye direction with the purpose then to move further in the northern direction and to attack and to recapture positions the Russians lost during the Ukraine's January, February and March counteroffensive operations. As for the Kherson direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The most important thing that the situation will continue deteriorating for the armed forces of Ukraine due to these massive attacks. Obviously, the strike that took place between the 13th and the 14th of May of 2026 is not going to be the last attack from the Russian side. We believe that the Russians right now will try to intensify the number of attacks, and most likely in 2-3 days the Russians will repeat. Now the Russians most likely will try to shorten the distance between massive attacks. When talking about the period of time between January and May of 2026, usually it took 10 days before another massive attack, but now the Russians most likely will try to reduce the number of days till 6 or 5 days between massive attacks. And if it happens, if the Russians are able to support such a pressure, most likely several front lines of the armed forces could collapse under such a pressure. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. We see that most likely it's time for talks for